Good evening, and welcome to this evening's Martha's Vineyard Community Forum on Immigration, sponsored by the Martha's Vineyard Social Justice Leadership Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in October of 2013. I am Joseph Carter, a member of the Board of Directors of the Foundation and currently its Vice President. What brought us together was a fundamental concern for social justice issues as well as human rights issues on Martha's Vineyard. We wanted to ensure through educating and encouraging leaders to step forward, either those who are perhaps victims or those who are just natural-born leaders, to really come forward on these issues so that their protection as citizens of our nation would be upheld and we would become, I want to say, an island that respects the rights of all people. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your attendance at Martha's Vineyard Community Forum on Immigration, sponsored by the Martha's Vineyard Social Justice Leadership Foundation. I'm Joseph Carter, a Foundation board member and longtime resident of Oak Bluffs. At the outset, I want our board of directors to stand and be recognized. I also want to extend our heartiest gratitude to the Edgartown Public Library for this wonderful assembly area, and one of its trustees and our board member, Herb Foster, again for allowing us to be here. Also, let's give him a round of applause. I also want to publicly thank Leanna Cajado of Martha's Vineyard Tax Services, who volunteered to interpret our forum posters and other information that we've sent to the Brazilian community. Let's give her a round of applause. We encourage every island community member to stand firm in the fight for the protection of civil rights and the opposition to racism and hate. Justice prevails when we stand together. We all lose when we are divided or apathetic. With that, I'd now like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Rebecca McCarthy. She is an immigration attorney. Why don't you just stand up so we can see you? Yes. Who recently returned to work on the island. Ms. McCarthy majored in Human Development and Family Relations at the University of Connecticut. She spent 2 years clerking at the Paul Weiss Law Firm full-time and going to New York Law School at night. Ms. McCarthy moved to Phoenix, Arizona and joined a small but very busy law firm due to controversial immigration raids at the time, initiated by Sheriff Joseph Apoiar. Everybody knows him. Ms. McCarthy has worked extensively helping immigrants currently living in the United States, focusing particularly on deferred action for parents and children, as well as assisting immigrants with proper documentation to be in the U.S. legally. She has successfully defended individuals being unduly prosecuted for felonies, which made them ineligible for bond in state and federal courts, thereby adversely affecting their immigration status. Our esteemed panel members are Laura Silver, who is a coordinating committee member of the community organizing group We Stand Together, or Estados Todos Juntos Martha's Vineyard. Their mission is to, quote, unite, organize, and educate ourselves as a community to protect our rights, our planet, and our democracy, end quote. She is a full-time resident of the Vineyard for the past 25 years. She also serves on the Island Parents Advisory Council on Special Education for the Martha's Vineyard Public School District. Adriana Lafay is a staff attorney for the ACLU of Massachusetts, where she has worked since 2012. She is focused on immigrants' rights issues and criminal justice, obtaining bond hearings for hundreds of non-citizens through the Gordon versus Johnson litigation in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Bar Association selected Adriana as the 2015 Access to Justice Rising Star, and Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly 2015's Excellence in the Law event recognized her as up and coming lawyer in Massachusetts. Adriana graduated from Harvard Law School in 2010 and is a native speaker in Spanish and Portuguese. Mary Costello attended Drexel University of Law, where she studied immigration law, immigration litigation, and asylum and refugee law from 2010 to 2013. While in law school, she volunteered at HIAS and Council Migration Services in Pennsylvania, where she worked on asylum, TPS, and cancellation removal cases. Following school, she worked in a small law firm handling family-based immigration matters. Before moving to Martha's Vineyard, she worked at a busy immigration law practice where she handled visa and immigration issues for specialized workers. She currently is an attorney at Thomason & Thomason in Edgartown. Ilha Silva of Minas Gerais, Brazil, who came to the Vineyard in 1988 as an entrepreneur who has launched a variety of businesses and owns Vineyard Grocery. Mr. Silva was very influential in establishing and serves on the board of the Brazilian Association of Martha's Vineyard. This group hopes to magnify the quality of life of Brazilians committed to living on Martha's Vineyard, as well as assist them to become legal citizens of the United States. And last but not least, we have a special guest, and he's due to come in, so I'm going to introduce him now. And that is our newly elected state representative for the Barnstable, Dukes, and Nantucket districts, the Honorable Dylan Fernandez. And I'd be remiss, because I think he's going to be called on by one of the... Oh, he's walking in. Okay? All right, so let's give a round of applause to the Honorable Dylan Fernandez. And I'd be remiss, one of our community experts is here this evening, and he's the chief of the Oak Bluffs Police Department, my friend and former colleague, Eric Blake. Before I turn the podium over to Rebecca, I want to point out that there are restrooms to the rear outside the door of the Assembly Hall. Please be considerate and either turn off or put your cell phone on vibrate. Know that we must end on time. So at 7:45, you will hear my loud voice again to say we must end if we have not ended at 7:45, because the library closes at 8 p.m. sharp, and we need to just leave to, again, help them with the closing at 8 o'clock. And if you have not had the opportunity to sign in, provide your contact information to stay in contact with the foundation and to tell us what you see as social justice issues on Martha's Vineyard. There's a clipboard that will be going around the room one last time to make sure that we get your information. Please fill it in. I want to thank you all for being with us this evening, and without further ado, I now introduce to you Attorney Rebecca McCarthy. Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here tonight. The purpose of this forum is to provide information, but also to start a conversation that will be important to keep on going as we see what actual changes there will be in the policies and laws under the new administration. We're going to start this forum by each of the panelists taking approximately 5 minutes or however long they'd like, just to say a few words to introduce themselves and their topics. After after their statements, I have a few questions prepared to start the conversation. We'll have a panelist conversation, but we'll have certainly plenty of time where anyone in the audience is able to come to the middle aisle and ask questions of our panelists themselves. Without further ado, let's start with Adriana. We'll go down the table.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Adriana Lafai, staff attorney at the ACLU of Massachusetts. It's great to be here. Before I start, I wanted to say a few words in Portuguese. Boa noite, eu sou a Adriana, sou advogada da União Americana do Lugar de Liberdade Civil. E me pediram para perguntar se tem alguém aqui que não se sente confortável no inglês, que não está entendendo muito. Tem mais alguém? So there are a couple people up front here who look like they need interpretation. Should we say everyone's communication in Portuguese, or would you like us to?
If you want to.
Okay. Ok, vamos tentar aí. Vamos traduzir algumas coisas. Isso. Tem alguém que pode sentar com elas, talvez, para estar traduzindo? Não jeito? Talvez vocês podem sentar juntos para...
Vocês gostariam que...
No, it's okay. He does not speak, but I can...
Oh, you can help him? Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you.
So the ACLU, just to summarize very quickly what we do, we sort of like to think of ourselves as the law firm for the Constitution of the United States and also here of the state of Massachusetts. So some issues that we work on include free speech, intrusions, government surveillance, LGBT rights, reproductive rights, open government and transparency issues, a range of criminal justice, racial justice issues, and immigrants' rights. And in my time at the ACLU, I've been primarily focused on immigrants' rights work and largely on detention and getting detained immigrants. We've been able to get several hundred detained immigrants in Massachusetts out of detention who were unjustly subject to a mandatory detention law.
Good evening, I'm Elio Silva. I have this island as my home. Not only the community, but also the island itself. Because without the island, the community won't exist. So I've seen a lot of things happening on the 29 years that I live here. That is kind of disturbing, and it's good that things like this happen, but not only right now for the immigration issue, but for other things as well. I mean, I think we're small enough island that we can actually be an example of how we can be a good steward, not only for the community itself, but for the other issues that we are facing, locally and globally. But there's a couple of things. I'm a business person, and so the one thing I learned as a business person, you don't get involved with politics, you don't get involved with sports, and you don't get involved with religion. And you can have all of it yourself, but it's just that's not something you're bringing into the business. But as far as immigration goes, it's kind of borderline because, it is political, but on the other hand, it is a community thing. And my take on it is that the community itself is like a cake, and without the ingredients, the community won't work. And unfortunately, everybody has their views, and it's very hard to see other people's view. And a lot of times I see more as education. And I've seen not just here on the island or United States, but the world in general, the diversity brings in a lot of benefits. And when we talk, the one thing about is that when we talk about immigration, we also getting ourselves educated as far as with women's rights, so child rights, or even animal rights, so there's more, there's a whole thing that you learn. If you learn one thing, okay, let's do well immigration, you actually open the door to do well on the other sectors as well.
My name is Mary Costello, and I work at Tomaso in Edgartown. And I have not been on the island for 29 years. I've been alive for 29 years. But I've been on the island for 2 years. And previously I worked in Philadelphia and then in Princeton, where there were very strong immigrant communities. And I was shocked to come here and find that it was a similar situation. I have not experienced, I think, what you probably experienced because you've been here so long, where there was a strong relationship between law enforcement and ICE. So I don't have experience with people, there being numerous deportations or people having to be really worried that ICE will come to the island, because it's my understanding that that has dramatically changed here in the last 3 years. And that the community and law enforcement in this community, it is not a priority for them to work with ICE to deport people, unless,
We had a couple times where it was very dicey, but the feeling I got the last couple of years is not as much.
that it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
That's been my impression since I arrived here.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think some of the concerns that we were asked to discuss might not necessarily be an issue here, because we have such a unique community that seems to protect its immigrants in a way that is different from what I experienced in New Jersey or in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Oh, here, I'll use this one. Hi, my name is Laura Silver, and I'm a coordinating committee member of We Stand Together, Martha's Vineyard. It's a new community organizing group that sprang up in response to the election. And some of you may have attended the event that we sponsored at Dennis P. Alley Park in Oak Bluffs the week after the election, or was it 2 weeks after the election? 2 weeks after the election, we had over 300 people attend. It was a really great event. Families, small children, different community members, and I think it was really great for the community to be able to come together. And out of that event, developed this network, this community organizing network that encompasses members from the Martha's Vineyard Social Justice Leadership Foundation. We have Rebecca working with us. The members of the MV members of 350 MBI, climate group, and multiple other community groups. So we have 4 main focuses currently in We Stand Together, and we're working on outreach into the community, developing resources, educating ourselves, and providing those resources to our community members to come up with plans, action plans, resources, and help our community with the issues faced in this post-election climate. So one of the things that one of our committees was looking at was issues in the schools and how we can support our schools and our school communities moving forward. And we were, in one of our first planning meetings, we were talking about, as parents, I have an 11-year-old son who's at the West Tisbury School, and a lot of us have seen, there's a lot of anxiety in the schools right now, among immigrant students, also among non-immigrant students, teachers trying to figure out how to support their students who are experiencing anxiety around the election. And as we were researching and looking into ways we could support the schools, we discovered information on campus safe zone resolutions. And all of you should have a packet here about campus safe zone resolutions. They're in place in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and they've been in place for about a year in both of those school districts. Most of the safe zone resolutions have been in the state of California, but they're starting to spread out now after the election across the country. And as we were researching this, and we've been providing information to the Martha's Vineyard Public School District as we've been researching, on December 18th, the National Education Association, which is the National Teachers Union, issued a recommendation that all K-12 public schools in the United States adopt a campus safe zone resolution. So that was a very big move. And 2 days later, the state superintendent of the California Public School District issued a statement recommending that every K-12 public school in the state of California adopt the campus safe zone resolution. So that all happened the week before Christmas, and we've been scrambling to pull information together with the assistance of the National Education Association and now MTA, which is the Massachusetts Teachers Association, that's the state union. So when we get back to me to the presentation, I'll be sharing with you the information that we've compiled with the assistance of NEA and MTA.
Hi, I'm Dylan Fernandez. I was recently sworn in as your state representative representing all of the Vineyard. And so, my full name is Dylan Andreo Fernandez, and half of my family is a Portuguese and Puerto Rican immigrant family. I'm third generation, but they came over and started a small strawberry farm over in Falmouth. And my family, my father's generation, grew up in really kind of extreme poverty. They had 9 brothers and sisters. None of them went to college. None of them, very few of them graduated from high school. And my father, started a small company, worked hard to see it grow, and I'm the first person of that very large Portuguese and Puerto Rican family to graduate from college. And so, although I'm a couple generations removed, I feel kinship to immigrants in our district and across our state, and I feel like my story is probably similar to a lot of immigrant family stories. And so, when Trump became our president, I was thinking a lot about how we can help vulnerable populations here on the Vineyard and across our state, and how we can help immigrant populations here on the Vineyard and across our state. And one of the things that I was looking at was sanctuary cities and sanctuary counties that we've seen pop up in the last few years. And I thought, this would be so terrific if we adopted this on the state level. And so I was really excited about filing a state level bill, making Massachusetts a sanctuary state. And I got sworn in on Wednesday, and on Friday we had a meeting with our staff where I was really jazzed up about passing this thing, filing it, working on it, hopefully passing it. And then I met with the team. We're like, let's go over the weekend, let's dig into this a little more. And so then yesterday, after doing some research over the weekend, we came back together and we're like, oh, someone has already filed this bill in our state. So I wouldn't say I was a little disappointed, but because I wanted to file it, but the much better news is, for me and for all of us, is that there's already a bill filed. It's called the Trust Act. It's filed. It was filed last session, so it's going to be refiled. Filing deadline's on the 20th. It's filed in the House by Alejandro Cavallo, filed in the Senate by Jamie Eldridge. And so this is a bill that had about 20 co-sponsors last session. Obviously, we're going to have one more, hopefully a few more, but something that there's already a framework for, which makes it a little easier, but also something that is going to need a lot of advocacy work on the ground level to push forward, because it's not just Republicans that opposed this bill last time around. There are Democrats who opposed this bill. So we're going to need a lot of grassroots advocacy if this is something that folks here want to push forward, and I know that I personally am going to be advocating for it. Just also wanted to touch on, because I also come out of the Attorney General's office. I worked in the Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. Wanted to touch on a couple of things. You don't need to be a citizen to get full protection under Massachusetts civil rights laws, right? So if anyone on the Vineyard, if anyone across our district or our state faces discrimination, and I want to be really clear here, they should call the Attorney General's office, and that person who discriminated against them will be held accountable and will be brought to justice. And that's really important. The biggest kind of wall to going after people who discriminate is reporting, right? Just because so many people have a fear of reporting it in the first place. So don't be afraid to report it. Report it to me. I'm happy to interface with the AG's office on it. And so I just want people to know that you have a resource locally and you have a resource on the state level for anyone facing discrimination.
Before we get into additional questions, I just wanted to let everyone know that MVTV, the Vineyard Gazette, and the Martha's Vineyard Times are all covering this event. It wasn't announced in the introduction, so I just wanted to let you know. One of the biggest questions that I've received in my office, or most often in recent days particularly, has been surrounding executive actions. So on the campaign trail, President-elect Trump has said that as president, he promises to get rid of all President Obama's unconstitutional, he describes them as executive actions. What does this mean? And is this something that he can do? Is there anyone?
Do you want to answer the, can he do this? And then, because this is in response to that statement that President-elect Trump says he will cancel the executive actions. That's why these resolutions were developed. Do you want to address like whether he can or what?
Can he legally? Maybe. I think we're looking at that. Can he? Practically, depends on whether the people will let him, right? And so I think this goes to, our responsibility as citizens to fight for the best and prepare for the worst. And I think this is DACA is a perfect example of an area where, students and others fought really hard to, undocumented young people fought for themselves to get that policy in action. And, hopefully with the support of a broader community behind them, they can fight to keep it in place. But, I think it's a murky legal area.
And did you want to address the
Yeah, so you actually, in your packet, if you flip about 4 or 5 pages back, there's a copy of the President Obama's October 24, 2011 executive memo that affects ICE activity in school districts. And what this memo did was it set aside what's called sensitive locations, which would be schools, churches, I think funerals, weddings, and a couple of other places detailed in here as off limits to ICE action. So that means under this memo, ICE cannot randomly enter a school or conduct a sweep in a school. So the National Education Association is taking President-elect Trump's statement that he's going to cancel the executive orders at face value. If he says that, they feel like they have to prepare for it. So what campus safe zone resolutions do is basically restate the memo policy. I hope I'm explaining this well. It restates the memo policy of that schools are off limits to ICE personnel. And then what it also does is sets up internal procedure and protocol for what to do if there is ICE activity near a school or if ICE tries to enter a school. So it would have a protocol for how the superintendent would respond, what teachers are required to do, and set up protocol also for supporting students and parents if there's ICE activity outside the school that affects students and parents within the school. So.
And Adriana had mentioned DACA, which is the program that was initiated in 2012 by the Obama administration, where students who, if they entered the United States as children and who had been present in the United States since 2007, or in school or graduating from high school, were able to apply for deferred action. I've also received many questions asking whether or not I would advise these students now, if they are eligible, would you advise that they apply, or would you advise that they not apply? I know it's a gray area. But
Yeah, I think there's no answer to that question. It depends. I mean, you probably are more on the ground with this. I don't think there's any one answer. I think, it's so uncertain what will happen that maybe I personally wouldn't apply, but that doesn't mean that someone else couldn't make a decision to do that.
So there's a group, excuse me, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and they sort of they've put forth a directive for immigration attorneys regarding DACA. And what they have said is to hold off and wait to see what's going to happen, unless you've already filed for DACA, and then you should go forward with your renewal because essentially you've already identified yourself to the government. But they've also put forth a couple of things to make people feel better about DACA, because there's been over 700,000 people that have applied and are in that have DACA status. Which isn't really a status. But they're saying is for them to deport those people, that would be extremely time-consuming and expensive. So that is unlikely. So even though Trump, he could possibly do away with Obama's executive action, it's very unlikely that he would deport those people that have received DACA status.
And also I would note, if you would agree that when in the instructions and in the directives to the students that were eligible to apply, this Department of Homeland Security had said that the information would not be shared with enforcement agencies. So it's like we've been talking about, it's certainly a gray area because if DACA was to be stopped, was to be revoked, then there would be possible means for litigation in different areas. So it certainly should be, the decision should be made on a case-to-case basis. In your observations on the panel, what have you observed as being one of the biggest challenges that an undocumented individual living on Martha's Vineyard faces? What are challenges for undocumented families?
I guess the way I see it, the difference here, if you talk about Martha's Vineyard, is getting around. Because if you talk about Boston, Somerville, or any other place of island, there's a lot of public transportation. So here they'll give the ability to get around, to be able to drive and so forth.
Also, I guess I would just add that because there's such a there's a large immigrant population, and then I feel like there's a large undocumented immigrant population here, and I think that sometimes people question why it is that people would stay in undocumented status. And that is because largely I have found there's not a viable path to citizenship for these people. So it's not that they want to stay as undocumented immigrants, it's that they don't have a viable option for becoming a citizen at this time.
And how can we as a community support immigrant families during this time? Any thoughts?
Go ahead. Well, we were just looking into, it's a little weird for me to be on this panel because immigration is such a federal issue, and I work for the state. I work for you, but I serve on the state. But in looking into the sanctuary state piece, there are a lot of cities, Boston, Somerville, Lawrence, even some counties that have sanctuary city provisions. And we're looking into it. All you have to do is just pass a law on the local levels asking or demanding that your police department not ask people about their immigration status. And that's what these cities have done, and one county in our state has done it as well. And so on the local level, bring it up in town meeting for a vote, because it's the local PD where we have the power here. On the local level, we don't have the power to tell ICE what to do, but we do have the power to tell our local PD what to do. And a lot of times this is brought up as an issue, the immigration issue, a lot of times is brought up as something that our president has said this, that immigrants bring crime, and sanctuary cities will have higher crime. And what we've seen is actually the opposite. In cities where immigrants are not afraid of going to the police, then they're not afraid of reporting crimes to the police. They're not afraid of being a witness to the police. So in a lot of ways, it's actually made cities a much safer place to live. So you can, I'm working on it on the state level, and there are avenues to work on it on the local level as well.
And then another thing to do would be to look at passing on the Vineyard a campus safe zone initiative at Martha's Vineyard Public School District. So what's happening right now is that, so the National Education Association has come out with this recommendation that's on the national level. MTA has not adopted a policy as of today. MTA being the Massachusetts Teachers Association. But they are supporting the national union by providing their information to districts in Massachusetts. So that information is available to our teachers union on the local level, and it's my understanding that they've actually only very recently been provided with that information, but that's great news. So that information is now here on Martha's Vineyard. So what community members can do is contact the union representative at your local public school, wherever your child or family member goes to school. Every school has a union representative. You can find out who that is and voice your support for a campus safe zone resolution on Martha's Vineyard. You can also contact the school superintendent, Matt D'Andrea, and ask that he take it into consideration and discuss it with the school committee, because it does have to be passed. It's actually fairly simple to pass one of these. There's a template in here. NEA provides a template. There's a couple of other national groups that provide templates. And it just takes the school committee and the superintendent drafting and then passing the resolution. And the wording can be changed and modified to suit the needs of each particular district. So that would be a way that we could, do something here.
And I told Chief Blake that I was going to put him on the spot, so to follow up on the law enforcement, the local law enforcement part. What is the role of local law enforcement right now in enforcing the immigration laws?
Well, I'm a white police chief that's run 3 times for the NAACP and been elected as president, so I'm used to being from out of state. Sir, he's still my boss apparently. We have, I'm speaking for myself, and the group came to our chiefs meeting last week, and I think I can speak for everyone that we have neither the time, energy, will, or the resources to engage in any 287G program, as they call it. We enforce state and local laws. We do not enforce federal law. We cannot apologize for being law enforcement, so we do have to enforce those laws on the state level and the local level. But like any cooperation with federal agencies is a different story. Cooperation can mean most anything, and I'll just use the last example of when ICE came down. They were looking for, and they had a warrant of apprehension and deportation for someone that was wanted for murder in their home country. So when they come, they say, "Do you know Joe Smith?" And we have a warrant for his apprehension, and he's driving this car, and he apparently lives at 123 Main Street. Can you tell us where that is? Of course, we'll tell them. The federal agencies, we help out the Secret Service for the last 8 years and 8 years before that. But we do not engage in asking people for what their status is. We will ask you if you have a driver's license if you're caught speeding. And Mary, you could probably speak better to what's going on at the court. With the Sheriff's Department has changed their interaction with ICE in the last few years. they require an actual deportation warrant in hand before they'll actually keep somebody before bail.
Right, an ICE detainer is not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough for them to hold someone.
Yeah.
So I think that's changed in the last 3 years. Previously, they would hold people or they would work with ICE to bring people to Boston, and that's no longer happening.
On the local level, I would have, as a police officer, I'd have no way of knowing whether someone had a detainer warrant or not. That's only found out when they're apprehended and brought to the county house, and that call is made.
Right.
We do not call.
Right,
We
when
don't
they're-
have any interaction that way with ICE.
Right, when they're fingerprinted, that's how
Yeah.
they would know if.
I mean, law enforcement, let's be honest, law enforcement over the last few years has had an uphill battle with public relations or trust issues and transparency, whether perceived or real. So, at least for Oak Bluffs, anything I would not authorize engaging in anything that would erode the confidence in whatever community was in our neighborhood. So, I hope that's a sufficient answer. And I said it at the meeting, at the chief's meeting, and I won't monopolize the time. A lot of times law enforcement gets lured into the money aspect of it, grants from the federal government, to engage in certain things. I'm hoping, my hope is across the state that there isn't a lot of federal money coming down, to have local law enforcement start signing up for, they call it 287G, but I hope that doesn't do it, because that lure is easy for some towns and cities and law enforcement. So we will not be engaging in that.
Thank you. And we live in a small community, and information spreads quickly. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. What do you feel is the best way, if there's policy changes, if there's law changes, where do you feel is the best place to share information on the island?
Facebook. Brazuca, other brasileiros mortos-vinhas envy Brazuca, and there's another one that I can't remember. There's like 4 Brazilian Facebook pages, and between all 4 of them, we probably have about 7,000 to 8,000 members. So that will be a very instant way of spreading any news that needs to be spread.
Can I just touch on something first? So just one of the things that we were advocating for in the Attorney General's office, to go back to kind of the transportation piece and the licenses piece, we were actually advocating for undocumented immigrants to be able to have a license, because what we saw is that this was a public safety issue, and the Police Chiefs Association actually signed on and backed us on this, because what we saw was that a lot of undocumented immigrants were using cars because they had to get to work, basic transportation issue to get to their job. And if they got into an accident, they wouldn't have a license and they wouldn't have insurance. And so that became, we saw this come up as a public safety issue, not only for the person driving, the person who initiated the crash, but also the person on the other side of it, who wouldn't be then compensated from the other person's insurance coverage. And so we're advocating for that, but the kind of bad news is that the governor and the administration were advocating for the opposite of that, advocating to make it so that undocumented immigrants would not be able to get a license, and that bill passed. So that was a bill, and it passed, I believe, I want to say last summer, but I'd have to double check on it, making it so that undocumented immigrants could not have a license. So that's something, that's a fight out there that I just wanted to make sure people were aware of. It's something that I'm obviously on the AG side on.
And I'm going to have one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And as we did before, if you do have a question, if you could.
I'm going to bring back to you,
Okay.
so just raise your hand.
Okay, perfect. I was going to say you can run to get in line, but that's perfect. So that's I think possibly Adriana would be the best, or not the best, but would like to answer this question, because I just wanted to see if you could address, I always hear people not understanding what rights individuals have regardless of immigration status. So there are certain constitutional rights that all individuals have, and could you identify a couple of those?
Sure, I think, there are certain things that only citizens do, like vote and serve on juries. But other than that, your basic rights to be free from government intrusion are shared commonly by all, regardless of status. So our Fourth Amendment protections, right? No one can be stopped on the street simply because of the way they look, not by ICE, not by anybody. No one's home can be broken into by the police without a warrant. And again, not an administrative, a paper signed by an ICE official, that doesn't count. A paper signed by a judge is needed for police to enter into a home in those circumstances. And so, I think free expression, all of our sort of basic civil liberties are shared by, regardless of citizens and non-citizens alike, and it's, incumbent upon all of us to exercise those rights.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add? Well, as I said, this is...
So, and everyone, sorry, the right to a free public education, actually, is, everyone gets that regardless of immigration status.
Yes, that's very important. And as I was saying, this is a forum to provide information, so we want to have ample time for all of you to ask questions. So I'm going to open it up. Yes?
Sure, I grabbed the mic. First, Joel Hopkins. I have a question for Chief Blake and Ilya. Hopefully they're not connected. Ilya, you mentioned some disturbing trends, and I was curious if you're observing disturbing trends going forward or only referring historically. But before I ask you to answer that, Chief Blake, we've had a very successful program of putting uniform officers in our public schools. And you and I personally talked a lot about the implications at the high school and young people's interaction with uniform officers. I think it's been tremendously successful as a parent of 3. Speaking of these issues of immigration concerns, that resource officer specifically at the high school, do you see them being burdened by any of this conversation, or how do you like to see that handled? And to Ilya, has that been an issue within the Brazilian community? That's my question.
I cannot speak for Sergeant Marchand in the school, other than I'm sure he's aware of children of people that are undocumented, and they're just like any other child in the school. It's not even discussed. But as far as you're talking about the sanctuaries, the safe school, that would be, what's the right way to put it? That if that was the rule, then we would absolutely follow it, and I don't think it would be an undue burden on him at all, or him or her.
Yeah, what I was speaking about is things from the past. Even though the past have a tendency to repeat itself, so I think it's very important, that we always go back and reflect on it, so we can not make the same mistakes we made in the past.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was remiss in not, I just came from a selectmen's meeting, but I wish I brought it. About 7 years ago, we put out a pamphlet from our department that was in Brazilian Portuguese and English. And what we were seeing as a trend was just that the Brazilian population were thinking maybe we were picking on them because so many people were caught driving without a license. My thought on that was, one, first of all, we were also finding out that a lot of the Brazilian community were not reporting crime when they were victims because they thought, if I report a crime, we're going to be deported. So the pamphlet, I'm paraphrasing the pamphlet obviously right now, and I have it, and we should reprint it again and send it on out there, that you will not, it says just what we were talking about, you will not be asked about immigration status. We will treat your case if you were a victim of crime like any other case. But I wanted to talk to being victimized part in that pamphlet, where, and I use this as an example, where if you're working for a company that knows that you don't have a driver's license, but they put you in a vehicle that's unregistered, uninsured, and the brake lights don't work, what do you think is going to happen? So I asked them to, out of your whole group, there's got to be someone with a driver's license, and make sure that your employer is doing the right thing and making sure that the vehicles are properly maintained and registered and legal, and we won't have any interaction. So hopefully, that has actually gotten much better over the last few years with the driving without a license. So again, that was a big problem. The big mistake. People were afraid to come forward because they thought as soon as they did, ICE would be called and they would be deported. But so that was just a message to get out that that's not what the business we're in. So those payments will be out again. We have dozens of them. Hundreds of them.
1 week, Chief? A week?
As soon as the roses can print. But I have a station. I just didn't bring it.
So if everybody didn't hear that, please go to Oak Bluffs Police Station. Why don't you give them a day? But, and do you have Facebook, Chief?
We have Facebook and Twitter.
It will be put up on Facebook.
They're one of the sites that we posted.
Yeah, and also, not to steal your thunder, out on the table outside, there are rights cards from the ACLU in both Portuguese and English on your rights. Okay, so be sure to grab one when you leave.
Any additional questions for the panelists?
I know that there's been a case where a student has been deported from the Vineyard. I think this was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more. So if someone could speak to exactly what happened and be instructed.
I'm not.
So I think I'm gonna see, is Lynn Dishfield back here? So the young woman that Chris is referring to, and I'm gonna blank on her name, but she's 22 years old now. She's living in Brazil, and she's an activist for ending childhood detention now. She completed university in Brazil, but she was 17 when she was detained. I believe she was detained on Martha's Vineyard. And she was in detention for a significant period of time, and then she was deported.
So I apologize, and I do have interaction with her now. She actually was, no, I wasn't thinking of that same case, but she actually decided to leave on her own because, so it was under an order of voluntary departure because she did suffer, she was traumatized because of the detention experience and decided to leave on her own. Her husband in school, and like you said, she certainly is being very productive and is working. She's in a master's program in Brazil, studying and detention rights of children in the U.S. Immigration system as well as Australia. So she's been extremely active, but it just that distinction as she actually wasn't ordered to move, but just chose to leave after that experience.
Christopher, were you asking the details of her detention? Is that where she was detained? Do you know?
Why was she detained?
Well, I believe, and I am talking about it because she had to share this information, so she's been very public about her story, or else I wouldn't be divulging all of these details of her case and of her life. But she was, my understanding was that she was a passenger in a vehicle in Florida that was pulled over, and all the members of that, all the individuals in the car were asked for identification, and she didn't have proper identification, and was, as a minor, she was detained. So she was transferred from Florida up to New York and was held until she was able to be released to her family. But there was it wasn't any type of
So she wasn't detained on Martha's Vineyard?
She wasn't detained on Martha's Vineyard. It was an action that took place. My understanding was that it was in Florida, that she was driving in a car that was pulled over. She wasn't driving, but she was in the vehicle and didn't have proper identification.
She was a student here.
She certainly was a student here, yes, and attended Martha's Vineyard Regional High School and all of that. Yes, she certainly lived on the island and grew up on the island.
And she was part of a webinar that the United Nations.
Yes, she's done amazing work in the area of child detention.
I've got a quick background question for you guys to confirm or not. One of the irony is an overused word. One of the puzzling things about the focus of the incoming administration and President-elect on Mexican immigrants was, as I understand it, it's not true that we've had actually nationally negative immigration into the U.S. over the last several years from Mexico. It was a net negative. Is that's correct, or is that just some urban fantasy I heard?
I heard on the news yesterday.
Negative, what do you mean by
There's actually more Mexicans leaving the U.S. than there are immigrating in, particularly illegally.
I heard that.
It was on yesterday's news.
Yes, right. More people are leaving.
I trust you guys more than the news. I wanted to ask the same things. I heard the same thing, not through necessarily quite as much of a news source, for the Brazilian community, especially after there was a relative strength of the real after our recession from 8 years ago. That by about 2010 there was negative net immigration from Brazil. So just the interesting thing about what we're discussing tonight is it's a kerfuffle around a fear of it doesn't really bear out statistically. I just wanted to, if you guys happen to know that.
I think in the Brazilian community, at least in Massachusetts and the Northeast, that trend has reversed. The situation in Brazil is drastically different than it was in 2010, and so I think we're seeing more people moving back here.
My understanding, and you probably have a lot more information than I do on this, but in researching in the school districts, my understanding is that the larger increase in immigration is coming from countries like Honduras and Guatemala, where you're seeing a lot of unaccompanied minors coming in because of the extreme violence in those countries. There was some ICE activity in Durham, North Carolina last year in January that resulted in the Durham, North Carolina school system putting a safe zone resolution in place, and all 3 children involved were from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, so it was the Central American countries.
I believe we also have 20% of our student body is Brazilian. On my district.
What, could you repeat that?
20% of our student population is Brazilian on Martha's Vineyard, 20%.
Again, I don't know the specifics, but I know, my name is Jean Hay, but I believe a number of years ago, under previous administration, I believe, a number of Brazilians without papers were taken from our community. And I think that is something that I certainly am concerned about in terms of the incoming administration. I think about the students in school, but I also think about their parents. So that's a question I'd love to have people address. And are there things now to protect from that? You know, I'm understanding from you, Eric, that the police here will not do that, but it would be ICE coming in who would need a warrant and a judge's order in order to do something like that. But I don't know if more could be said about that and so forth.
No, I mean, I would just make a quick note, and then of course, additional comments from the panel. I mean, as far as an individual who is not lawfully present in the United States, Adriana had talked about rights, but there certainly is a right to see a judge. So if an individual does not have a prior order of removal, every individual in the United States that is undocumented, has either overstayed a visa or has entered without status, has a right to see an immigration judge and go through the administrative law proceedings. So there's a due process, Fifth Amendment due process right. So if there was an incident where an individual was detained, there certainly is procedures in place and protections under the law that families would have additional follow-ups.
Yeah, I think just to add to that a little bit, the Bush years were very different than the past 8 years. I mean, we used to see a lot more home raids. I mean, I've never lived on the Vineyard, but where I lived in Somerville, we used to lock our doors, not to keep out burglars, but to keep out ICE, which had a habit of raiding homes in the middle of the night. They used to do those big factory raids. We haven't seen that activity in the past 7 years or so. And so, I think there's certainly a fear that that will come back, and it's important for people to know their rights and to be in solidarity, especially in group spaces, right? Group resistance can really prevent an ICE raid from being effective in a group setting. At homes, if people know to not open their doors, it's very important for people to kind of resist some of the ways that people often used to get caught up in these things. I've also been asked to say a few words in Portuguese. Oi, pessoal, então pediram para mim falar para vocês, o povo brasileiro que está aqui. Acho que o evento foi feito para vocês, né? Então, convidando, né, para quem quiser fazer pergunta, a gente traduz a pergunta também, tá bom?
Just for my clarification, could somebody just walk us through the types of visas that are available and what the parameters are around them that people get to come into the country?
Like J1.
Yeah. Are you asking about to come into the country or avenues for people that have overstayed or?
No, well, it's just coming in the work visas, what the different types. I mean, because we see so many people on the island. Here,
Sure.
So working that sort of thing.
Right. So people that are working in the summer primarily at like restaurants. You're talking about students. That would be the J1 visa, and those visa programs are largely set up by the countries that they come from. I don't know if that's what we both experience. So immigration attorneys on the island are involved in that, and that's for a very limited time, and it's while they're a student. So it's sort of a part of their education that they're able to come here. The other way that people come here through H1B or H2B, that I have not really seen so much here. It maybe H2B, because that's unspecialized work. So if you're a landscaper or if you're someone that doesn't have a graduate degree or a college degree, then you could qualify under an H2B, but there's a cap for that. And all of that needs to be filed by April.
And there's filing deadlines as well. It's also the Department of Labor's involved. So
Right.
There's certifying that there aren't U.S. citizen workers available for the positions.
Right, and you have to have a U.S. employer sponsor you and file for that. And for H-1B workers, that's what I was primarily doing before I came out here. It was like H-1B, L1, which is extremely specialized workers. That's not something that I see here at all. Because that would be like people that work in technology or people that are doing some sort of pharmaceutical work, something that you have to show their knowledge is so specialized and another person in the United States could not fill that role. And that's not even, I haven't seen that here. I don't even think that we have the sort of the jobs here that would require that. Because what you would have to show that someone here could not do that job. And you'd have to have an employer sponsor someone.
I think there was somebody once here a number of years ago. She was a porcelain artist from China who was here for a period of time doing ceramics work, and I think it was so specialized that I believe she was on that kind of.
Right, because then there's for people. I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
There's a wide variety, but they're very specialized and they're very, so that's, as you can see, it's hard to describe in one.
What about the tourist visa?
And then the tourist visa, certainly individuals enter as tourists and they're authorized to stay for a 6-month period of time.
thing before we go to the next question. Just in terms of relief for folks already here, it's really important, especially for any person under 21, I think should see an immigration attorney, especially if they're not here with both parents, whether they're by themselves or with only one parent. You know, it's worth at least looking into whether there's a possibility of getting special immigrant juvenile status. Some of the immigration attorneys here on the island.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? So one of the things that that we saw was that you know, like many vulnerable populations in our state, immigrant populations are very often taken advantage of. And so one of the things that we saw crop up in the AG's office was attorneys who were unlawfully practicing as immigration attorneys or saying that they're immigration attorneys and having no legal background whatsoever. So, and the AG's office actually put together the Attorney General's office guide for immigrants looking to receive citizenship, and the guide's still up on their website. And so basically, if you are looking to hire an immigration attorney, you got to make sure that they are an attorney. So you got to go check. If they are an attorney, you got to check to see if they're registered with the Board of Bar Overseers. There's also a very kind of small segment of folks who work with immigrants to get citizenship that aren't attorneys, but they are accredited. The position is an accredited representative that helps folks fill out the forms. They have to be accredited though, so there's also an agency to check to make sure that they're above board as well. So we have some terrific attorneys here who are fighting the good fight, but it's really important that if you are kind of looking to seek an immigration attorney, to make sure that you check with the proper places to make sure they're acting lawfully.
And just sort of to piggyback off of that, taking care of a vulnerable community. Specifically on Martha's Vineyard, we have a huge influx of J1 visas in the summer. And as a community, if we can hold each other accountable for employers that aren't paying their J1s, or people, the housing crisis here, everyone's familiar with that. They're forcing 4 or 5 people to live in one room together and with not proper access to facilities. That's something that we can do on the community level to make sure that that is not going on, that that's reported and that stops, because that's a chronic issue here.
Sure, that was a perfect segue, Mary. I'm going to tag right on to what you're saying. I noticed that David Vigneault was behind me, so I'm looking forward when I'm talking behind. One status, citizen status and housing is a real question that I have. We all share that challenge. What is the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority's ability at this current point to serve undocumented citizens? And does David have any additional comments of what we can do as a community to ensure that all people in our community are living in safe environments?
Thanks, Bill. So the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority is an odd beast. It's chartered as a local housing authority, but it has no state-aided public housing. So in this state, with state-aided public housing, you can't ask the question, are you undocumented? So federal units, HUD units, you have to ask the question. So we have neither. So the middle road is the income. You without the subsidies of state-aided units or HUD units, you need income, and you need certifiable income. So you know our office intimately, and you know how that works. So we tell people, get a note, get a letter, get some kind of documentation on that. And so we have a fair amount of folks who apply. that are documented and wonderful tenants, and that's great. We can't help anybody, and this is an unfortunate fact of life on the island, if you don't have the income. And I think many of us here, I recognize faces, are working with clergy groups and the faith community on the shelter options on the island, as well as the transitional housing option right now. Regardless, that's just about income. And on the other side of it, the crisis that we're in right now on the island is, it doesn't matter how much income you have, you can't buy a 12-month lease. So that's the other side. In between, I don't have anything satisfying to offer, except that the income drives it right now with the 84 units that the Housing Authority has, which is a pitifully low amount. And hopefully we will have some of, listen, in frankness, there's not going to be any state-aided public housing added to the island under the current administration. It's just fair to say. DHCD has backed off. Okay, I'm going to get off my high horse for a second. Our young representative is smiling at me. He could probably chart out exactly what's going to happen where the state housing moves to compliance largely. They're not going to subsidize development. We're in each other's pockets and each other's hands trying to do this on our own because nobody is coming off the boat to help from the Fed or the state. And so I will say that the six-town Vineyard that we're in trying to do this stuff is our biggest impediment. We need the political will to look at each other and figure out what we can do. We're rich communities, we have the ability, and we have to apply that ability to everybody who's here, regardless of their documentation.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Just now, what did you say about the six towns? There was a problem in the coordination of the six towns?
Yeah,
no, that I know.
The problem is that there is six towns.
Regarding the housing, that's what I meant.
Yeah, of course. There's 6 sets of volunteer committees in each of the towns working hard on all of the issues, whether it's nitrogen loading, zoning, what have you. And it's an incredibly inefficient way to do business out here. It's the reality, but it is, when you have these issues that transcend town borders, such as nitrogen, such as housing, putting it into the 6-town process it's an additional difficulty.
I have 2 questions. One is for Dylan, and the other is probably for Mary and Rebecca. Dylan, the bill's been filed.
Well, sorry, it was filed. It was filed last session.
So it's going to be refiled.
It's going to be refiled. The filing deadline.
And it needs a lot of advocacy.
Yeah.
So my question to you is twofold. Can you kind of spell out what that advocacy looks like? Like what the bill needs from people, or what you need from communities in order to get it through? And then also kind of speak to what if it doesn't pass?
And this
Sure.
is this is the Trust Act, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
And then my question to Mary and Rebecca is, if the recommendation is that anyone under 21 see an immigration lawyer, I'm concerned about the cost of that for undocumented kids under 21. Are services accessible?
Well, I guess I'll just answer that quickly and then I'll pass on to Dylan. The Island-wide Youth Collaborative has started, there's an Immigration Resource Center. That's a program that's just become active recently, where once a month there's an attorney that is available. It's the first Friday of each month, available at Island-wide Youth Collaborative for free consultations all day. So I believe from 9 to 5, I should.
You said the first Friday of each month?
I believe so, but that's something that we certainly will share widely on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then also, I know that local attorneys, myself included on the island, are planning on adding additional consultation days in order to provide the best information and the most information as possible. So that's certainly something that is an issue and we're working on to address.
MIRA is also a statewide agency that provides some free immigration legal services.
MIRA.
MIRA. But to your point, I mean, so with any advocacy, especially uphill advocacy on the state level, it's really important to have a really strong kind of grassroots network of folks reaching out to people in the state house on the issue. And it's always most effective when you're lobbying representatives who are wavering on the issue, and that lobbying is coming from their local constituents. So I'd say call your representative, but in this case, I think you're good, right? But so
call your friends in other districts.
exactly, that's exactly what I was gonna say. So if a representative gets 2-3 phone calls on an issue, they're like, that's probably a big issue in my district, right? It doesn't take much to be an effective advocate on the local level. I've only been in there for 4 days, but if I got a phone call, if I got 3 phone calls about one issue, I'd be like, wow, we gotta get on top of this immediately. So when it comes to advocating for this bill, and something I've been talking a lot about, and how kind of I see the role of the state rep and see kind of where my office can play a broader kind of advocacy role. One of the things that we're going to be doing is sending out a weekly newsletter from our office that talks a little bit about kind of what we're doing on the state level, but also gives action items on what folks in the community can do. And so when this act comes up, when this is something that it's really time to advocate for, we're going to send out a newsletter saying, either, hey, join up with this advocacy group that's pushing it, probably Mira, or, hey, call your friends in these towns, right, and have them call their representatives, because these are the reps that are wavering. So as a freshman, I'm kind of trying to think of ways to be effective in a place that's pretty top-down and leadership-heavy, and your kind of your sway is built on how many years you've been there, at least in the House. So one of the ways I think you can do that is effectively work with outside groups to put pressure on people inside. So that's one of the routes that I'm going to be taking, and I hope that this newsletter provides people locally an avenue to join me in advocating as well. So with that said, I've sign-in sheets in here, and I'll just leave them on the table if folks want to sign up and join up.
Can I just add quickly to that? My colleague Laura Rogello has been traveling all around the state and is involved with the Trust Act. I think she might have drafted it or helped draft it. And she has been helping local towns implement local trust acts. And I think here you guys right now have very friendly local officials, which is great. But the benefit of having kind of official policies is that then Representative Fernandez can say, hey, all 6 towns here have local trust acts, and look, we're so happy with this on the Vineyard. And it just adds to that momentum that helps us spread this movement across Massachusetts towns. Because the more towns become trust or sanctuary cities, the easier it is to think about passing something at the state level. What was her name? Laura Rogello. I'm happy to give you her information afterwards too.
I'd like to ask the question that probably mostly is for our attorneys. We know that the INS has an incredibly great wide swath of power in people's lives. I think as we're talking about all these ways of supporting and being in solidarity, that although in the room we may be preaching to the choir a bit, we need to spread out the understanding of how difficult the pathway is to legal status here in the States. And I wonder if you could provide just a little bullet set of points for those of us who are lay people.
Well, in essence, very brief, sorry. There's 2 ways in which an individual can become a permanent resident and then go on and be a citizen of the United States, essentially through employment or through family-based petitions. So what I work with predominantly on the island are family-based petitions. So it's if a child sponsors their parent, if a U.S. citizen child over 21 sponsors their parent, or a U.S. citizen spouse sponsors their spouse. But there's only two pathways. So for example, if an individual comes to the United States on a visitor's visa and does not have family members and does not have an employer to sponsor them, there's essentially no action that can be taken if they decide that they want to remain in the United States. I mean, it's much more complicated than that, but it boils down to it's through family or employment, and the employment side can be very difficult. And as we were trying to list off the visas, you can see how complicated and particularized those types of visas are.
Right, and you could, I guess, explain a little bit more on the family-based side, how long it takes someone's priority to come up.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, because, for example, yes, there are a U.S. citizen brother could sponsor their sister, and that seems like a pretty straightforward process. You establish a U.S. citizen sponsors their sister, but right now the waiting period is, I believe, 16, depending on the country, it's about between 13 to 16 years before the priority date to become current. So that initial petition can be filed and approved, but in order to move on to the next step of the process, you have to wait for that priority date to become current, and there's just such a backlog that it's
Could you speak a little bit about what it means to be paid under the table? Is that being employed? Oh, no. Could you speak a little about what it means to be an employee, and what does it mean to be paid under the table?
I mean, I'm not sure paid under the table, that doesn't necessarily apply to or relate to at all being an immigrant or an immigrant status. I mean,
Elio, can you say anything to this, please?
I mean, so when paid under the table is I just got a person coming today that's a U.S. citizen that I know her for forever, and she comes and says, "Oh, I'm collecting government money. I can't show an income. Can you pay me under the table?" So basically, the person might have either be laid off, or the person. I mean, there's many reasons where a person want to get paid on the table. The person doesn't want to pay taxes at all.
No, I don't think it's the person who's getting paid under the table. I think a lot of people here get paid under the table. I've employed people under the table for the first time here in my life because that's the way it's done.
No, I mean, I don't agree too much with that. But it is better for the employee in a way, like right there and now. But down the road, it's very damaging for the employee because he doesn't get Social Security, he doesn't get workers' compensation, he doesn't get laid off. So is that like a...
Would that qualify as employee?
No.
Oh, no.
Is that what you're asking? Is how does that count towards employment status?
It doesn't count, I know that, but I also think that a lot of people are employed that way on this island, and I don't particularly agree with it, but it is one of the big practices here, and somebody's got to address it somewhere, or think about it and mention it, I think.
I think a lot more people than the immigrant population here get paid under the table. So that's sort of a larger issue. I don't know if this is the appropriate forum to talk about that.
Because they can't get citizenship if they're paid that way. That isn't an issue.
So that's an employer issue, you're saying?
Yes.
That's something that needs to be addressed with employers?
Yes.
That they're not paying people above board. So it's making it more difficult for people to get employment status and get citizenship.
Well, even if you're paid under the table, you can still declare your income. And you can still have a taxpayer ID number. It wouldn't be the same as a Social Security number, but that's how you would pay your taxes. So that doesn't necessarily that affect your immigration status. And even if you hadn't been paying taxes, you can set up a payment plan. There are plans to do that, to pay back taxes, and that wouldn't be a bar for obtaining status necessarily. So I'm not sure. I mean, are you sort of talking about Martha's Vineyard in general? Everyone's paid under the table, or are you talking about it being?
She said not everyone.
I mean, just in
She's saying it's a pattern. She is aware of a lot of employers that do pay under the table. I think that's her point.
Well, right, and that affects the person's stability.
We made clear it affects the person's status in the future, but, okay, so we made that clear. Go ahead.
The one thing too, what might seem to be on the table might be a 1099, is a subcontracting job. So the person, it is paid on the table, but he's considered a subcontractor. And also when I look at the whole island, the biggest employers, like Stop and Shop, the hospital, the schools, I mean, none of them pays under the table. And some of them, they might seem like under the table, they're just a different type, it's not a W-2, it's a 1099.
Any other questions for our panelists?
This is a question for Ilya, I think. And it goes, we've been talking all night, you've been talking, we've been talking, about immediate problems and how to solve them. This is a future question, the future of Martha's Vineyard. Ilya is one of two people that I'm aware of recent Brazilian descent that get involved in Martha's Vineyard bigger picture issues. It's really hard to get people involved. When Ilya first came here, he was the Brazilian community. And it's grown really dramatically. But it's a community within a community. And as somebody who advocates for Martha's Vineyard, I want to get those people involved. So I see lots of people here illegally, but I see lots more that are here legally that are still not embracing the community of Martha's Vineyard. They're embracing the Brazilian community, they play soccer, they watch a game, whatever. But they're not EMTs, they're not firemen, they're not getting involved in after school programs. How do we get those people to reach in and become part of the bigger community?
I guess it has more to do with people like me.
Running for office.
to be able to educate. Because the funniest thing is that you brought up a funny story that happened about 15, 20 years ago. I was helping the Habitat for Humanity, building the houses. And there was a group of Brazilians there that was helping as well. But I didn't know they were doing community services, because whatever situation happened. So they were trying to figure out, did I beat up my wife? Did I get caught? Like driving without a license. And they keep talking, looking to me, finding what can move and ask. So what did you do? And I said, so what do you mean? And so, no, because you here doing community work. I said, no, I volunteered to help you build a house. So really? So, but I guess, if they knew, the reward you get, from being able to help. Because that's what makes the person I am. Because it's really great, to be able to provide and to be able to give back. And maybe where they came from, the community where they came from, they never had that. And they didn't have the challenges that we do. Because over here on this island, especially 6 towns, there's a lot of giving back that needs to be done to be able to make it work. And so it is, I would say, to level education and maybe find a way for them to feel the joy and the recognition, when you do help. I think that there is definitely a chance to do it. And I think somebody like me or somebody else that could help a group do it, make them so they can feel the rewards and maybe even like public recognition that was done. And I think what can easily be done, like I said, something for a long term.
this is a follow-up question, there may not be time for it, but maybe it's an idea that you can work on. I love that answer, but I'm also curious if you have any understanding if there's a cultural, either a cultural thing that the Brazilian community has or has here in particular, or maybe it's our vineyard culture that gets in the way of that happening. In other words, is there some particular cultural trait that makes it difficult? And if so, maybe you share something you can think about, and if you share it with more of us non-Brazilians, maybe we can reach out and help bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think the one thing is knowing there's a need. If anything that's happened like habitat for humanity, I mean the people that are putting together, to figure out a way to reach out, to the communities more. Because I know a lot of time I talk to people that there's such and such event like the beach cleanup and this and that and so forth. I mean, most people don't know. And so it'll be more reaching out, like when there's beach cleanup, I usually gather a bunch of friends of us. When the Matosini's youth family is bringing down the ball, I try to gather half a dozen people and go over there. But I talk to them, I don't know about it. So it's, communication I think is the number one. And yeah, they're not used to, but I think once they do once and people recognize that they did it, people do more of it.
So we have one last question.
Eu preciso de ajuda, Hélio, para que você traduza, por favor. Meu nome é Meire, eu tenho tentado juntar a comunidade brasileira através do meu Facebook chamado Brazucada. E através disso, do convite que eu fiz, temos aqui hoje uns 15 brasileiros. E eu gostaria de responder a pergunta desse senhor.
Okay, her name is Mary. She's the one that runs the Brazucada, the most popular Brazilian Facebook page on the island. And she actually posted on Facebook that this meeting was happening tonight, and there's about 15 people here that came because of the Facebook page. And she'll like to answer the last question that was asked.
A maioria de nós temos vivido aqui com medo. A gente não frequenta mais coisas por causa do medo que a gente tem de se abrir. Inclusive hoje eu gostaria que na próxima reunião, se fosse possível, que tivesse realmente a tradução em inglês, porque eu conheço o meu povo e tenho vivido de perto com eles, muito perto. E eu sei de pessoas que precisam de casas e não conseguem por medo de pedir a casa, por medo de mostrar que é indocumentado, por medo de não ter a carteira de motorista, e isso tem prejudicado muito a nossa comunidade. As portas têm se fechado constantemente e a gente não tem participado mais por causa do medo.
The main thing that is within the Brazilian community today is fear. There's a lot of families that they might not ask for help to get housing or to expose. They might even qualify, but they do not come forward because they're afraid. There's a lot of events that they could be a part of it. They hear about it, but they do because they're afraid. And once again, she mentioned about the driving problem. How can you go in and do something in some place if you're not even documented? You try to drive as least as possible when it's extremely necessary. And she believes there's a lot more reaching out that can be done, so there could be that union between the American and the Brazilian community. She said translation. Qual a tradução você está falando?
A tradução para o português.
De quê?
Porque dessas reuniões, porque ela perguntou se a gente estava se sentindo confortável. Eu conheço pessoas aqui que, assim como eu, não falam inglês muito bem e não se sentiu confortável de dizer que não está confortável.
Obrigado. Yeah, so she asked about translation, and I thought it was about the document that the chief was talking about, but it's funny because it's exactly what she's saying about the fear. She said there's a lot of people on the back of the room that does not understand any English, but because they're afraid, they've been afraid to lift up their hand and say we need translation. So she like that going forward, that we could have translation for meetings like this.
Is there any way that any of the recordings on the that will be available could be translated for folks to watch this later with translation? That could be looked into.
That is a good idea. Maybe subtitled. Yeah.
And I do want to say too for the school, the state zone resolutions, and I apologize, this packet is all in English because we only just got this information from the NEA, and they do not have it translated yet into any languages on their website. So one of the hopes that we had tonight, I had a friend who's Brazilian who was homesick today and who was able to translate one of these while she was sitting on her sofa this morning. But one of our hopes is that someone here might volunteer to translate this packet into Portuguese for us so we can make it available to island families who don't speak English. So see me afterwards if anyone can do that.
Why don't you just say that, please, into the mic?
I just wanted to say, the Vineyard Healthcare Access Program on New York Avenue is friendly toward Brazilians and any immigrants from anywhere. Their number is 696-0020, I believe.
And Sarah Kuhn, who runs it, is fluent in Portuguese, and there's a number of people who work there who are also fluent in Portuguese.
Well, everybody, we want to thank everyone, but before we end, let's just give our panel and our moderator a round of applause. On behalf of the Martha's Vineyard Social Justice Leadership Foundation, just know that we've gotten some very good information that we need to follow up on in terms of our website. Our website was just developed. It was supposed to go live tonight, we were promised by the developer, but it was probably going to be another day or so. Our website is on the pamphlets that were given out, so be sure to go there, and we hope to have some information very soon as a follow-up to this, as it relates to having information that's in both English and Portuguese, and particularly Portuguese to help the Brazilian community here on Martha's Vineyard. And to our Brazilian citizens, know that our organization is ready to stand with you on any problem in the community. You're a part of our community. We want you to be part of our community. We love you being part of our community. And and I'm sure there are others here, let's give our Brazilian community a round of applause.
Amei o pessoal está ali atrás, não sei o tanto que vocês entenderam o que ele falou, mas a associação que ele representa está aqui na Ilha, totalmente do lado de vocês. Vocês talvez não podem nem saber, mas está sempre trabalhando com esse evento aqui para estar do lado da comunidade brasileira, e não importa o status, e que para poder qualquer um procurar o papel foi passado, tem o website deles, que não hesitem em procurar, em pedir ajuda a eles.
Agora eu quero que os nossos brasileiros dão uma salva de palmas.
I just want everybody to please put on your calendars Sunday, February 5th from 12:30 to 2:30. We will have Representative Fernandez and also our new State Senator Julian Sear at the West Tisbury Library doing a community policy development afternoon that We Stand Together is hosting. So we hope that you can all make it and speak with our elected representatives more about these issues.
Thank you all for your helping us this evening. Thank you all for attending.